So good turnout for Jim's presentation on why to build and how to build and when to build a railroad. This is our October clinic. We did the 4th Fridays for September and October. For November and December, we'll go back to the 3rd Friday. So I'll get you announcements out, but just to avoid the holidays, that seems to work a little bit better for us. And then back, I think will be probably 3rd Fridays the rest of this clinic season. So January through probably May. We are just making plans for our January clinic, which will be usually a prototype bent to it, where we have a dinner and some people talk about the prototype. And I've got commitment from 3 actual locomotive engineers to talk about how they run their trains. Greg Ammer is a BNSF engineer up in the Seattle area. Tyler Whitcomb is a retired engineer, and Alan Manson, a UP engineer. And in January, they're going to give us sort of a roundtable discussion on how the real railroads run. And then February, we're going to do a roundtable of small layout operations. And March, we'll do a roundtable on large layout operations. And we'll finish that up on April. The third Friday in April will be how to use JMRI to run your operations. So a lot of operations coming in the second half of our clinic year.
Do you have a date on the January? Is that the 19th?
I think it'll be the 19th. We haven't tied that up with the vendor yet, as far as having the room for dinner and what will be on the dinner.
So it'll be a dinner.
Yep.
Is it going to be here and around?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Yeah, good.
So same place we used before. They have that area off to the side, and they set up a buffet for us. We should be able to hook up all the pieces that we do here, so even the people from distant can join in. What?
You're going to try to do Zoom?
Yeah, we'll try to do Zoom in. We'll see. We'll find that out. So this is our October clinic, put on by the Olympia Clinic and supported by the 4th Division of the NMRA. Thank you for everybody that's NMRA members. There's not a requirement, but we sure encourage you to do that, to join the NMRA and see the benefits that you can get there. Things like these clinics. 4th Division's very easy about not requiring everybody to be in the NMRA to learn about the hobby. I like that approach. Hopefully over time, people that enjoy these clinics will then join the NMRA. That's the pitch for them. Couple things coming up. We have the Boeing swap meet, big swap meet up in Kent, run by the Boeing Club. That's November 11th. There's a Christmas show then coming up after that. I don't have a date for that, but there's a number of things happening here in the next little bit. Boeing is the biggest one that I know about. And I think the last piece is, for those of you that are here, got the donation can out over here. Everybody probably remembers that it was really Chuck Ricketts that pushed the idea of doing a collection every month so we could get a present, give it to Toys for Tots to train up a child. So if you've got $1 or $2 you can throw into the can tonight, that would be great. While you're over there, there's snacks in the pink box. Those are purchased by the clinic, so enjoy that. We've got plenty of money to have as many snacks as you want, so don't be bashful, have a lot. And I think, unless anybody else has questions or comments from the Zoom audience or here in person, we could get Jim started. Anything before we start, Jim? Okay, not seeing anything. Anybody on Zoom have anything? Then I'm going to step aside and let Jim Younkins tell us a thing or two about building a model railroad.
Well, hi everybody. So I'm going to talk about building a model railroad, but I'm not going to go into a lot of details on construction and the like. Let's see, let me get my presentation up here. So I need to share the screen. Go that. Ha, there we go. Okay, so it all worked, surprisingly.
We're
Okay, so,
supposed to sound like we know it's gonna work.
yeah,
We're not
sure, yeah,
surprised.
right, they see right through that, right? Um, so, what I'm going to do is just cover some of the stuff you really need to do before you actually start pounding nails and cutting wood or whatever your medium is, the planning and all that. So without further ado, I'll get started. Oh, and this is kind of basic, right? This is not the advanced class or anything quite like that. Okay, so my first question is, so what is model railroading? And so you really don't need, to build a railroad of your own to be a model railroader. I think collecting would qualify, and being a boomer operator, just going around to other layouts and operating, that's model railroading. And so on down the list there, so there's also more than one kind of layout. You could do modular railroading, which was my first attempt at model railroading. In fact, I still do have modules, N-track modules in the club. So that actually, for me, was a real good way to learn some of the skills that I applied when I wanted to build a real built-in model railroad. And there's probably other things that would qualify a person to be a model railroader as well. So I think the first question, really important to ask yourself before you start this endeavor, is, do you really want to build a model railroad? Like I said before, you don't need your own model railroad to enjoy the hobby. Another question to ask yourself is, do you have a theme or idea of what you want to build? That's really good to know before you start, because a lot of things are based on those things. Then, do you have the time, space, and commitment? And sometimes we underestimate or overestimate all of those, and you can quite easily get in over your head. Start planning a big project and then realize you don't really have the time to complete it. And then model railroading can be a real money pit. I think anybody who owns their own model railroad can attest to that fact. So be prepared for that in advance. Model railroading has gotten to be really expensive these days. The cost of track has skyrocketed. Price of equipment, locomotives, and rolling stock has gone way up. So if you're just starting out, just be aware. But on the other hand, building a model railroad can be a great way to express your creativity. And that was kind of my bag. I had a really boring job, and this was a real great way to express my creativity. As a transit bus driver, it was really not good to be creative with the bus routes. Sometimes I did by accident, but anyway, not a good idea. So how to get started? So, I guess these are really basic concepts, but really consider what it is you want to model, because that will give you a lot of direction as you go on to the other things. That if you don't know what you want your finished product to be, it's hard to plan something. Another thing, it took me about 2 years to figure out what scale I wanted to model in. I knew I wanted to be a model railroader, but what scale do you choose? And I think, what the market is like 75 or 80% HO scale modelers. That was the road I was about to go down until I discovered N-track and saw a large N-track layout with long trains running around it. And I thought, oh, wow, how cool is that? So that was what I chose. Whichever you do some research. That, for me, doing research is one of the really fun parts about model railroading and building a railroad, is kind of the historical research. But research, when you have a question about something or need direction doing something, do a little research, and the internet is a fantastic place to do that. And then develop at least a rudimentary plan. sketch down, on paper, kind of what you want to do based on your space and where it is. And then lastly, but most importantly, stay optimistic and confident. I know a lot of people who want to build a model railroader, but they can't get started because they're afraid to make a mistake. And that is a big stumbling block for a lot of people. People, especially with engineering backgrounds, and they're perfectionists and they want to have it all planned out. But stay optimistic and confident, and don't worry about making mistakes. And then if you get so far enough, you're actually going to build a railroad and you want to create a plan. Some of the things to think about is, again, do some research on prototypical railroading. I know a lot of model railroaders that don't really understand how the real world railroad operates. I mean, it's obvious trains go by, but what does a railroad actually do? How do they operate it? And so if you don't know how a railroad operates, it's really hard to model it. So rail fanning probably is one of the really good ways to understand that. Do a little reading. But that'll really help with your modeling once you start building things. If you want to model a specific time period, a place, or railroad, identify sources of information. And again, the internet is a really good source. Historical associations, if you know what railroad you want to model, they can be great sources of information. There are a lot of great books on railroading and railroads. Determine how you want to run your railroad. That really isn't so important to throw in the beginning. You can figure that out as you go, but the basic concept of operations, trying to operate almost, semi-prototypically, or would you just want to watch trains go through scenery and build this beautiful scenic layout with trains running through it? A lot of people like to do that. So, that's part of the hobby. So think about that before you start putting things together and building bench work and laying track. As I said just a few minutes ago, develop a preliminary track plan, although this is going to change as you get started probably. I know I spent hours and hours and hours. I probably went through 2 tablets of graph paper drawing track plans, and I never, ever could actually stick to it. I'd start actually building it and realize, oh, well, that isn't what I really want to do. And so, but it's a good exercise because it's kind of spurs your imagination a little bit. And, you drop all these different track plans and you can pick and choose the parts you like best of them, but you have these ideas in the back of your head to work from. So again, consider where and how much room you have to build it in. In my case, I had a whole basement of my house, primarily because it was dark and dingy, it smelled musty, and the rest of the family didn't want to go down there because there were great big spiders. So when I decided I wanted to start building a model railroad down there, nobody objected. It was like, yeah, it's all yours. So I had the basement pretty much. But, whether it's one wall and an extra bedroom, or maybe half of one stall in a double car garage, or what have you, kind of identify that before you make huge plans. And then consider where and how much room. Oh, that one, I just went through that. Consider layout, height, depth, aisle width, all those technical things. So when you're trying to lay out a plan for your bench work, be sure you allow for people space. That's going to be really important if you want people to operate your railroad or come and view your trains running around. People have to be able to get around. And then develop a plan for building your bench work and how it will fit in your space. So those are just kind of basic things. There's a whole lot more than this, but this is kind of some of the high points. before you start investing hundreds of dollars in material and if you don't already have them, power tools and the like, think about, what you're actually going to be able to do and commit yourself to doing it. Construction. So there are so many different ways to build a railroad. I'm not going to get into the technical aspects of building. It's it ranges from extremely simple, put a piece of plywood on some sawhorses and lay track and you can have a railroad. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not very permanent. So some basic carpentry skills are going to be required, but don't be shy to ask for help. If you're not a real proficient carpenter, that's okay because it's pretty easy to learn. And if you have, questions about what to do, or you want someone to come and help you get started, don't be shy about asking because most model railroaders are really happy to share. Then decide on a method of construction. There's several different ways of doing it. One of the real popular ways is an open grid, where you just build a framework and then you lay your roadbed on top of that, and then you build scenery around it. Another way is tabletop, basically, which is you create a platform and you build on that. Both have their advantages. The tabletop method might be one of the easier ways to construct a railroad. But there's lots of different ways to do it. And I've certainly used some of each on my railroad as it's developed. So like I say, you can do as I did and just figure this out as you go, which is what I did. I never planned my railroad to be what it is. It just happened. The scale you model will influence the materials and methods used for construction. Well, obviously, if you're modeling these great big heavy O-scale engines, you need to support them. If you're modeling these little bitty tiny N-scale trains, it's like, build it out of styrofoam. It's not gonna, it'll be just fine, if that's your choice. So it has a big difference on scale, has a big difference on how you build the benchwork for your railroad. And then sharing your plans for your railroad or your railroad with others is one of the best ways to get feedback. And that I have always found that to be very, very valuable. Friends have helped me figure out what to do when I've made a mistake or pointed out errors in my track plan, and accept the criticism, accept it and learn from it, because that's how you're going to improve your building skills, come up with new ideas. Early on in building my railroad, a friend of mine was over and said, gosh, on that peninsula, you really need to have a really deep canyon and a big tall trestle. And I thought to myself, yeah, sure, who's going to build it? And so, I don't know, I planted the idea. 6 months later, I have this really deep canyon and a tall trestle. So, it was a great idea, but at the time I thought, well, that's silly. But so don't be afraid to accept feedback and criticism. It's really helpful. And always, always, always be open to learning from others. When I started model railroading back in the 90s, I really was a novice. And I did have some carpentry skills, and I was totally fearless. But a lot of things I didn't know how to do. So, learning from others, going to clinics. There's a lot of how-to clinics on actually how to do the nitty-gritty things. They're on YouTube, in person, conventions, especially conventions. That's one of the best things about NMRA conventions is the how-to clinics. I've been to enough of them to know there are several aspects of model railroading I'm not going to tackle until I go back and listen to the clinic again, because they were too complicated. Okay, so I'm going to kind of walk you through how my railroad developed. that schematic there is an old schematic, but it pretty much captures what my railroad has become. It fills a garage and it fills the basement, except for the pantry and the laundry room. Everything else is model railroad. So the current railroad is the fourth railroad in a succession of attempts to build a railroad. First one was a typical 4x8 piece of plywood with a generic layout on it that got so complicated that if I didn't go down and run it for a couple of weeks, I'd forgotten what switch controlled which switches, and to relearn the whole thing all over again. It was a learning experience though. And then I was doing N-track, building N-track modules. So my next layout was basically N-track modules all the way around the center of my basement, around the stairway and the furnace and all the utility stuff. Made a loop around there. And it was a miniature N-track layout. I had a lot of N-track modules at one time, enough to go clear around. So that was sort of satisfying for a while, but then I kept trying to modify it to make it more operation friendly, and it just didn't work out. And then as I had that layout, my kids got to an age where they were interested. So I built them a 4-foot by 12-foot HO layout that they could help me work on. That was a really great experience. They both of my kids, my daughter and my son, they were probably 8 years old and 6 years old. They were interested in that for a couple of years. It was a lot of fun. And then my son got interested in Ninja Turtles, and the railroad became a battlefield, and everything deteriorated from there. My daughter lost interest. So I gave that layout away, and scrapped the N-track loop around the basement and started building the current railroad. So how I decided what to build. I actually decided that I would base my railroad on a couple of actual railroads that did exist in the local Thurston County area. And Dr. James Hannum's book, Lost and Gone and Not Forgotten, it has a lot of research on these railroads. I actually found a magazine article that gave the whole history of one of the railroads I was in a model, and that just really hooked me on it. I decided to build a freelance railroad simply because I thought modeling the prototype would be so difficult, because if you built something wrong, everybody would know right away that you built it wrong. That doesn't really exist like that, or that really isn't a Milwaukee Road station. That's not right, or one thing or another. But if I figured if I freelanced, I could do it any way I wanted to, as long as I kind of based everything on real railroad practices as I understood them at the time. So that was why I chose to freelance. And I have since decided that maybe it would be easier to build to the prototype instead, because at least you've got a model to base everything on. I have to make everything up, although I try to do it in a believable way. So as it says here, I got interested in operations. One of my mentors had a large N-scale railroad in Tacoma, and I was a regular operator on his railroad, and that really hooked me on operations. So I was going to try to mimic some of what he did. So what the picture you see there is that was my plan for my railroad. That was what I was going to build, and it's still pretty good size for an N-scale railroad. And I thought that was a huge undertaking at the time, and I actually built it and completed it and ran trains on it and started operating, inviting guest operators to come and run it with me. And that lasted for quite a while, a couple of years anyway. And then, well, let's see, here's going to be some pictures. And so I built a classification yard there and a paper mill in Little Rock, where none ever existed, but in my world it did. A sawmill at Malone, and the feed company. And this was Mud Bay. Mud Bay is an industrial area that never really existed in Mud Bay, but it's a real place. There's a few pictures of that part of the original layout. Although these aren't pictures of the original railroad. I actually found some a couple of years ago, and I tried to scan them, but the quality of the pictures were so poor, they were basically useless. But it really shocked me at how basic everything was. So the easiest thing for me was building the bench work because I knew what I wanted to build. The hardest part was the track plan. And it dawned on me that the track had to follow the bench work. So that kind of made the main line easy. It had to stay on the benches, and so it had to follow around the room on the bench work. That's pretty obvious. So, but when I got to like an industrial area, well, how do I lay it out? And I would struggle with that. I went to a swap meet one weekend and came home with this big cardboard box of used N-scale buildings, all kinds of buildings, houses, and they were factories and all kinds of used, kind of broken up, grungy looking N-track or N-scale buildings. And it was like a treasure, right? So what I did was I used those to figure out track plans. And so I would lay them out. I knew the main line had to be somewhere. Sometimes it was in front, sometimes in back. But I'd lay them out and kind of figure out how track would fit between them, what each building might be, et cetera. And that was how I came up with my track plan. Kind of trial and error. So then, yeah, I decided that wasn't enough and that I needed to expand my railroad a little bit. And so I had to build a laundry room first because, as laundry rooms are, they create a lot of lint and dust, and it was beginning to interfere with the railroad. So I told my wife I was building her a laundry room. And in reality, I wanted some walls to build against so I could get over to the other side of the basement. So the laundry room came into being, and I built around that. So that went in a couple of different stages there. So I built this part first and then thought, well, I'll get brave and I'll build across the laundry room door and put in a lift out bridge. So there's a lift out bridge. And then another, this last picture, that was going to be a staging yard for the rest of the railroad. And it turned out that I created a logging reload instead and a couple of sidings, and so it did serve as a temporary staging yard for a while. There's a few pictures of this. So the upper left scene is actually, oh, is it? Yeah, upper left scene is where the staging yard was going to be. It's that wall. So it didn't turn out as I thought it would. Well, then sometime later, I thought, well, I've gone this far. Maybe I should just go all the way around the basement. So I have to understand that actually building and creating more railroad is one of my favorite parts of the hobby. So I built this section against the far wall took me almost all the way around the basement. And I decided that since we were in and out of the garage door all the time, I couldn't block that with a lift out bridge. So I just left that all open and it just ended there. So the upper level became the town of Rochester, and the lower level was originally a kind of an industrial area, which I called Grand Mound. And it later became the Centralia staging yard. So move along. There's a few pictures of, and again, these are pictures that are more recent than the original. The sawmill on the lower left picture, the big orange building, that came from an N-track module that I recycled. So I took all of the structures off of it and repurposed them. And then I filled the basement up, and I thought that was the end of it. And well, so then I thought, well, I don't know, it seems like it needs to go further because I don't want to end it right there. So it was a perfectly good place to end it. I just wasn't satisfied with it. So I thought, well, my friend in Tacoma put holes in the wall and went from room to room. I thought, well, why can't I do that? So I got really brave and I cut holes in the wall and began building stuff out in the garage. Originally, it was just kind of a staging area, and then it developed into more operations out there. And so it was all coming along pretty well. I built some cabinets to put tools and stuff in so they weren't cluttered all over the place, and then built on top of the cabinets. And then I realized that maybe I should finish the walls and the ceiling before I went any further. So I took everything up. I left the cabinets, of course, and then finished the walls. That was a long, tedious project, but got the walls finished. So they're bare concrete walls mostly. So I just skimmed them with drywall mud and smoothed them out and made a pretty good surface for a backdrop. So that was my technique on that. And I had to drywall the ceiling and all that stuff. And then I continue on. So then I continue building stuff out in the garage. And so as you can see, my railroad has sort of been in a continuous state of expansion since I started it. And so I'll build part of it and get it all done and think, well, there we go, this is good. And then I get another idea and, oh, well, that would be kind of fun to do. So I figure out where I can put it. And so then this is a picture from out in the garage. So it actually did develop into something pretty nice. Well, so the garage was full, except that there was still space in the middle where I'd parked my car. And I thought, well, I don't really need to park the car in the garage. And so I built some movable modules from learning from my N-track days. So they're not N-track standard modules or anything. They're just modular sections that I can put up and take down. They're currently not in place. They're currently in storage. But down the middle of the garage, I created Shelton. And basically Shelton in my world is a sawmill complex. And so it's a 30-inch deep, 14-foot long sawmill complex, which is pretty big sawmill in N scale. And so that was, I haven't had it up at all this year. It may come up next year, I don't know. I built a replacement module for it that I like better. It's smaller and easier to handle. And it's not a sawmill, but anyway. So here are some scenes from out in the garage. The upper level has a logging scene. And the lower level is I'm calling it the town of Elma. And some of the features of it are actually, oh, they're building in the upper left-hand corner, Elma Feed Company. I actually did build that to the prototype. I took tons and tons of photos and measurements, and the owner gave me a tour inside the place, and it was pretty amazing. So I went to even so on the sliding freight door in the front of the building there were all these posters for events. And so I took a picture of the door. And then when I wanted to build that, I printed it off and shrunk it down on the computer and printed it on paper and then glued it to the face of the door. And so it's an accurate representation of what was being advertised at the time. It was kind of fun to do. Then a friend of mine donated the Helix. He was taking his railroad apart and gave me this nice Helix. And that allowed me to build a lower level. So that was originally just going to be a staging yard underneath. However, it developed into more than that. And so the upper right-hand corner, you see it is a staging yard. And that fits right underneath my classification yard. But it's also the Tide Flats industrial area, and I have a staging yard at Fife around the other side of the room at that level. And it actually has operations down there too for a few people when no one else is running the railroad. You can't operate it during a regular operating session because people would be tripping over you. So here's just a few more shots around my railroad. So at different stages when I thought the railroad was done, I would correct problems, and right. And so if I figured out there was a problem with the track plan or a track arrangement somewhere, then I figured, well, I built it. I guess I could rebuild it if I could build it to start with. So upper right-hand corner, I totally ripped everything up down the plywood and started over with the track plan. And so there's a couple of places that have been rebuilt like 5 or 6 times, and I think I finally arrived at final plan. I don't know. The point is, don't be afraid to make changes when you start building something. If you realize that maybe that's not really how you wanted to do it, just take it up and redo it. It isn't that big of a deal. You can, if you're careful, you can usually salvage the track and put down more road bed and redesign the track plan. It's not a huge deal. So during all of this growth and construction and so on and so forth, I've continued to operate the railroad. And so operating sessions have began to include more people as I had more railroad to operate. And so my railroad is kind of proof that you don't have to plan everything in advance before you build it. You can, if you're going to build a small railroad, kind of include the option to expand it at some point if you decide that you want to add to it, or if you're in an apartment, you build a small railroad you can take out. Design it so that you can add to it, and if you move, maybe you'll have more space and you could build a bigger railroad based on that. So anyway, don't be shy about starting, and you don't really have to have everything set out in concrete and laid out in advance. Come up with a plan, what you want to model, how you want to model it, and then kind of let it develop as you go. At least that's my philosophy, and it's worked well for me. So far, everything is integrated together pretty well. I'm continuing to expand my railroad. I'm building another layer on top of everything. And so I'll have like 3 levels, I guess. But I think building is a lot of fun. Running trains is a lot of fun. And being able to create a vision that you have is really very rewarding. So, you know, I'd say, well, don't hesitate. Just if you want to start a model railroad, you know, plan ahead, get a basic idea of what you want to do, and then go for it. The end.
Well done. Well done.
Why don't we stop the sharing so we can see
Yeah.
everybody's faces and see if we have any questions? Do you anything in the chat?
Oh, let's see. I have to escape before I get my cursor. There we go. And stop sharing. There we go. You want to come back over here?
No,
No?
because I'm hoping that there's some questions for you.
Oh,
And
okay,
in the room too, there's,
sure.
and repeat the questions
Yeah.
in the room.
So Jim, your railroad's got a very unique and detailed character. You know, you have a unique livery, you have a paint scheme, you have supporting equipment,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's all thing. Talk a little bit of, you said, you know, get an idea of what you wanted to build, which way you're going. Talk a little bit about your genesis on how'd you come up with, this is my logo, these are my colors, this is the regional railroad or that I want to build.
So I don't know if you heard that. Rye's question was about how I developed kind of the feel for my railroad, its identity, the identity of my railroad. Boy, that was interesting. So I had read some articles and I came up with a name for my railroad, the Mud Bay and Southern, and it's based on the Mason County Logging Company and the Mud Bay Logging Company. And at the time, there was a member of our NTRAC club who was a graphic designer. And you know, I had painted a couple of locomotives that I ran on the NTRAC layout, orange and green. I like both orange and green, and I just painted it in that color. And so at one of our shows, he presented me with this little watercolor drawing of one of my locomotives, and he lettered it and all that with a railroad name. And it sort of got the wheels to turning. So I thought about, well, so logging railroads they're budget oriented, right? They're usually on the cheap if they can be most of the time. And so they're not going to come up with real fancy paint schemes. And my railroad started off with just orange and a little bit of green. And then it evolved. Just, I suppose, just like it does in the real world, right? I mean, it went from green and black BN to all these various colors of BNSF. And so my railroad has, the paint scheme was developed in eras. And so there's an early scheme that's really simple. I thought, well, it'd be more fun to have something a little fancier. So then I just put more green and less orange and put some stripes on it. And then it went on. So I have about 6 different paint schemes for my locomotives. And it's just kind of it just can develop over time. So my newer locomotives, so that's the other thing. I like to buy equipment. You never have enough really cool locomotives because they're fun. So the newer ones have a modern, really, you know, standout paint scheme. And the oldest ones are just plain Jane. And then it kind of evolved in between and worked up to the fancy paint scheme. And Rye asked about supporting equipment. So yeah, I mean, you have to have, well, besides locomotives, you need freight cars. I saw an ad in a magazine, maybe Model Railroader, for a guy back east who made decals. I thought, oh, I'll get some decals made. A friend of mine who was good on CAD helped me design a decal sheet. And I sent it off, had a whole bunch of decals made. And so that's kind of where my logo came from. My friend on the computer designed a logo for me, and with my input. So it just kind of all developed. So now I've got a whole bunch of fake cars, and they vary from being boxcar red to being orange and green to being plain green to whatever, different eras again. And so yeah, it gives my railroad an identity. But my railroad these days, my railroad is not the biggest part. Now the Milwaukee Road and the BN, each of them have more trackage than the Mud Bay and Southern does. But most of the operations is oriented around the Mud Bay and Southern. Did that answer your question?
The part of your presentation where you had the photographs of scenes flowed on up to the track. That was so cool. That was the ultimate cool. Wow, that was just cool. Love that part.
The computer program did that for me.
Yeah, but still, that's the first time I've seen that.
Oh,
It's knocked me out.
any other questions?
Anyone online?
So I got one for you.
Yeah.
You built a logging railroad, but you have plenty of other industries around the logging railroad. How did the other industries get involved?
So my premise was that these two logging railroads merged and applied to be common carrier railroad to serve some of the industries that they hauled logs to. So they were hauling lumber. So it started off that way. So it became a regional railroad, and for a long time, the major industry in this area was the forest products industry. And so I've always been fascinated with that. Love sawmills. It's fun to go watch sawmills operate. And the smell's so good. But I decided that's what I wanted to model, was the forest products industry, because that was the dominant industry around here for a long time.
But then you've added all sorts of other industries alongside. So since the
Oh.
rails were there,
Well, so yeah, I mean, you look trackside in any community, and there's going to be common things, like an oil dealer. Well, not anymore, but back in the day, most small towns, if they weren't close to a big city, had an oil depot where, they'd haul fuel around to different places from there, out to the farms or whatever, or logging camps or what have you, or elevators, grain elevators. So this area also has a lot of agriculture, and farmers have to get their feed from somewhere. So you're going to have feed companies. So most of these other businesses are just the sorts of things that you would normally find in small towns scattered across the country. There's very few of them that are very unique. I do have a couple, but I keep trying to think of new industries.
so you can buy more cars.
Exactly. Yeah.
How much have you had to modify your household electrical?
Yeah, so I didn't have to really, I added some circuits, right? So our house is nearly 100 years old. And when we moved into it almost 40 years ago, the whole thing had like 4 glass fuses in it for the whole house, and it was like, if you turn too many things on at one time, it'd blow a fuse. So one of the first things I did when we moved in was I completely rewired the house and had a new 200 amp panel put in. And the experience, I rewired the house myself, which was a pretty brave thing to do. But I had the code book, the the synopsis, right? And I figured, sounds pretty simple. And the inspector thought it was okay, right? So whatever, it worked. So I wasn't hesitant then to add a couple more breakers and then run some circuits for the outlets and lighting and so on. So I have two 20-amp circuits for power for the layout and two, I think they're 15-amp circuits for the layout lighting. And so far, that seems to work okay. So I think maybe the main power draw is probably the lighting when it comes to think about it, because I have 3 boosters, and if they're working hard, they're only drawing 5 amps a piece, and they're on 2 separate circuits, and so I don't think that operating the railroad is drawing that much current. It's most of the lighting, I guess. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Anybody?
Brian, anything from chat?
There was only one comment that said that they enjoyed the presentation. Nice presentation layout. Thank you. So I guess my question is, and I don't know, I mean, you're very enthusiastic, but when does a layout become too much for the guy? You know what I mean? I mean,
No,
you
I
ever
know
feel
exactly
like
what you
the
mean.
Maintenance is.
Yeah, and I've certainly gone beyond that.
Well, you have endless energy
Oh.
somehow, but I mean,
Oh, I should point out, in all fairness, I retired in 2000. So I have been basically a full-time model railroader all these years. So yeah, that gave me a lot of time. So that's kind of how I managed to keep going with all this stuff, is I have unlimited time. But probably about the time that I finished what was in the basement and the garage, I began to realize that I had a whole bunch of stuff to take care of, and maybe it was on the edge of too much. And of course, I've added a whole bunch since then. And so now I know it's more than it's, well, I'm retired, I can manage it.
I guess the other side of the question is, do you have ample help that you can call on? Do you have work parties? Do you have people that can help you out?
Oh, so that's the other thing. I do have friends that keep offering to help. And I have friends that will help me prepare for operations. Because preparing for operations for me is kind of a big process. Resetting the railroad, restaging it, that whole operation I can do like in half a day by myself. It isn't that big of a deal. But before an operating session, I find that I have to actually test run all of my locomotives that I'm going to be using during a session. Oh my gosh, there's almost 100 of them. So most of them are in pairs, okay, so it's not that bad, but you have to run them around the railroad, get an exercise, getting running good, and oftentimes that means putting them on JMRI and tuning them a little bit, speed matching again, that sort of stuff. But I do have help, but I haven't asked for help in building it. Except once in a while, I ask someone to help me lift something or put something in place. But the actual construction of it, I have so much fun doing it. And I have to admit that I'm really picky. And if somebody can't do something my way, then I'm not really happy with it. And sometimes I redo it. But it's easier just to do it myself. And I have fun doing it. And this way, it's all my fault if there's something I don't like.
Do you have an estimate of how many days a week you work and how many hours a day? Is it continuous or does it? go in
No,
streaks?
it goes in spurts, right? So certain times of the year, I'll spend more time in the garden, in the yard, keeping track of that, and or other activities. But and then there are times I might not run a train for a month. But then again, there are other times when I go downstairs and run trains a little bit almost every day just to have.
So you
the fun
run
of it.
just for yourself too?
Of course, yeah. I just assumed everybody who owned a railroad did. Well, the funny thing though is during the COVID lockdown, that would have been perfect, right? Except that I was so depressed the first year, I never even went downstairs. And it dawned on me one day, you've got this really nice railroad downstairs. You should give it some attention. And then I got hooked, right? And that's when I started expanding to a new level above everything else. So I got motivated.
Jack Burgess, Yosemite Valley layout,
Mhm.
has an article in Craftsman this month. He never runs his layout. He does not care to run his layout.
Oh,
It's just for operation when his gang comes over.
oh,
So just one more time, there's no right way to do model railroading.
There isn't.
Everybody does it their own way.
everyone has their, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's kind of the cool thing about this hobby is you can do it 1,000 different ways and it's still all good.
Oh,
Right.
good.
Yeah. In my perspective, if it has wheels and it's self-propelled, I'm in for it. I don't, if it runs on rails, so much the better. So,
Then you'd love dead rail because it'll run on the board.
sure, yeah, really. Yeah, I've always been interested in machines. So, yeah, no, I have fun playing with my trains though. Do you, other layout owners in the room, do you run trains on your railroad?
I don't run very much,
I don't either,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah. I guess, each to his own, and and I'm not consistent, but I like to go down for the trains when I get a chance. And actually, that's a great way to find flaws in the railroad, right? So I've noticed that when you invite guests over to operate, sometimes they don't mention difficulties with running trains, right? And they just kind of deal with it, and I don't know what they're thinking exactly, but they don't want to, bother me with it. So when I run trains around on my own, I find all of these little issues, and so I might start off like switching in some industrial area and realize there's a section of dead track and go, oh, I didn't know that was dead. And then the rest of the day I'm busy dropping feeder wires and whatever, right? Yeah, but it's good to run trains on your own layout once in a while, just nothing for no other reason than just to make sure it still runs.
How often do you find out in the track? Yeah. And what do you use right away or?
Okay, that's a fair question. Yeah, so Bob asked me how often I have to clean track and what do I use to clean it with. I usually go around with a bright boy before every operating session and just kind of lightly go over industrial spurs and track that is not used very much. The main line, if I'm test running trains and everything is running smoothly, I don't mess with it. But if I notice that trains start getting bulky, or if there's one particular area that they're not running very well, I have a track cleaning car that I cobbled together. It's just a box car with a pad underneath it with some corduroy glued to it. And I spray a little CRC 226 contact cleaner on it and drag that around. And I'm sure what it's doing is it's spreading the gunk all over the railroad. But it turns out it's conductive gunk. And so I don't know. It seems to me if it's all conductive and trains run well on it, it doesn't matter so much whether you get a little black on your finger when you rub the rails. It's like, okay. I have tried almost everything that's popular these days. I tried Nolox. I tried what is it? Wall clipper oil and I don't know. Whale zip, tried that. Automatic transmission fluid. You name it, I've probably tried it at one time or another. Keep in mind, my railroad is 25 years old, so I've had lots of opportunities to try different things. And they all work for a while. You know, it's the same with the CRC. It works for a while, but it's easy to apply. Sometimes I actually go around and kind of wipe it off. You know, I take a. So I made these little track cleaning tools. They're basically a piece of wooden dowel about 12 inches long and a little flat piece of plywood glued to it, and then I do a bright board to it. But if you take a piece of cotton cloth and just wrap it around that and drag it, and you can wipe off the rails pretty handy with that. I don't know. Yeah, it's if somebody has a foolproof method, I'm in for it.
Yeah, real.
It used to make a spray for noisy pollen controls for radios. Radios actually potential and it's called no noise.
Oh, really? Wow.
I'd actually use WD-40 for the sounds.
Yeah.
Even though WD-40 is supposed to be non-conductive.
Well, yeah, but it probably cleans the gunk off pretty well. Yeah. Yeah, I was like I say, everybody has a technique of their own that they like best. And, you know, whatever techniques they are must work for them, or they'd be doing something different. So, yeah, but use a bright boy and a little car to drag around. Usually keeps things running pretty good. I find the best way to keep things running smoothly is to run frequently. If the layout sits unused for very long, the dust in the air accumulates on the rails, and I don't have a big oxidation problem, but I have dust problem. And so running that little dragger around in front of the locomotives, you know, kind of dust off the rails, that helps. Yeah.
I can't afford mine as a snowplow.
Hey, Jim.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim. This is Steve Shores. I spaced out and just logged in about 5 minutes ago.
Oh,
So I'm hoping to watch you know, what I find, and I just think it's valuable, is that when I built my train room, I totally eliminated all my heating ducts.
yeah.
And if I do any heating, it's with something that doesn't blow air, because dust is your enemy. And so any leakage that you have in your basement or through doors where you've got air conditioning or heating blowing around, it just moves everything around. And I rarely clean my track, and I do use CRC when I need to. That's why I glow in the dark, is because I use CRC. But just keeping the room, and you know, those electric oil heaters are fantastic because they just don't put out any air movement. It's all just through radiant heat.
Yeah, right. I have one of those.
Yeah. But just seal up as much as you can, any little hole where wind can come through, and dirt and dust, and especially garage doors.
Yeah, yeah, you know, that's a good point. And, you know, if you live in a fairly modern house, most new houses are pretty well sealed up. I'm afraid my house, if it's windy outside, you can feel the wind inside.
Same here. And carpet too, carpet on the floor. It doesn't matter how much you vacuum it, it's gonna harbor dust and things like that. And I notice it when I operate in carpeted railroads, that the day after, you know, my lungs are tight, just from everybody walking around and stirring up the dust.
Yeah,
Kind of like going to a street festival, you know, outside where it's all dusty and dirty. And I'm a big advocate for hardwood floors. Or not hardwood, but just hard floors. Yeah.
Hey, Steve, you asked if this would be available, and it will be on the 4D YouTube channel. Byron Osborne is recording it, and he'll get it up
Thank
there sometime in the future. I
Thank you.
don't want to commit a time frame to him, but he's
Usually
usually
around
pretty,
2 weeks.
he's usually pretty good about doing that.
Thank you. Thank you.
any other questions, from anybody?
One of the reasons there are relatively few questions compared to other clinics is because you've thought it all through better than most guys. You've got it all figured out. I mean, you really do. You're about as close to having that by the short hairs as anybody.
Well, I can get done the things I need to do, I guess, but there's so many different ways to do them, so,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't mean this smart alecky, but you guys would just be amazed what Dead Rail would do for you. I just finished the Tacoma Yard Throw, Main 1 and Main 2, double crossover, each leading into a pair of double slips, leading to the Auburn staging, into the engine terminal, into the freight yard, into the Union Station, and to the tide flats and so on. And the thought of gapping that with the Dremel and all of the jumpers that would take, even for DCC. And then the yard itself, in O scale, my yard is about 38 feet long. I don't think Home Depot and Lowe's together have enough linear wire to run that many feeders off. And it's with the Dead Rail, I'm impressed with how the control is. It's way past the equal of DCC. It's just superb. And you save all of that track cleaning, all of that gapping, all of that wiring, and it just. I don't think it is yet practical for N scale. Some guys are doing something along that line, but it's certainly doable in scale HL, and for sure.
It would be doable in an N scale steam locomotive with a tender.
In the tender.
But if you were in the modeling the diesel era, you'd have to have a dummy diesel unit with the batteries and control in it.
Yeah.
Or a box car or a caboose with the controls in it, but I've never been a fan of having a box car permanently attached to my locomotives.
How would a caboose would work?
Well, only if you could change ends. You could switch it from one end of the consist to the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was hoping somebody would come up with really teeny tiny batteries and a controller no bigger than a decoder, and then be able to induction charge it and put induction chargers in your engine terminal. And then when your batteries get low, you pull into the engine terminal and park it there for half an hour and let it recharge, and then you could run it on another run somewhere. I mean, that to me, that'd be perfect.
Yeah.
But no one's come up with that yet.
Well, I'm almost there. I just lift the water hatch on the tender and stick the.
Oh, yeah,
telephone plug.
on an O scale. Yeah, exactly.
No special track or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the miniaturization in almost everything, is coming lickety split. So I don't think it would be very long before it's practical in scale. Anyhow, I'm not trying to.
No, but I agree. Dead rail would be the perfect solution to a lot of problems.
Well, it fits with what you had to say up there. We need to think through
Yeah.
If you are at the point where you're not yet committed and you're thinking through your options, that would be one option to really take a look at.
So kind of the new technology or emerging technology when I began planning my railroad was DCC.
Yes,
Of course, it existed well before that, but it was really emerging as a popular form of control. And so when I planned my railroad, from the very beginning, I planned on using DCC. And that was difficult at first. So because I couldn't afford to buy all these expensive decoders, and no one made locomotives that already had decoders in them. And so it slowly progressed, and now I don't even know how many locomotives I have with decoders in them, but lots.
That's a technical term, right?
Lots, yeah, a whole bunch. Well, shall
Can we
we?
steal your place for just a
Yes.
second?
Thank you,
Thanks,
Jim.
Jim.
Well, thank
you.
Thank you for
Round of
putting up with
applause,
me.
Jim, for a great presentation. The idea behind this presentation was to get people to realize that you can build a railroad. You don't have to have miles of space. You just have to have an idea and move it forward. So hopefully a few of you will try that.